Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheilla, and my story today is called Angel in the Storm. It was a bay up in Alaska. It was different than other bays in the world. It was shallow. You know, if you take and put just a small water in a bowl, and then if you were to blow wind on it, it would splash way up big. If you had a bigger bowl with a lot of water in it, and you blew on it, it would go. It wouldn't be nearly as violent. And because that bay was shallow, when the storms that oftentimes happened in that part of the world, up in Alaska, the storms there, they would have windstorms that would come up very quickly, and they would be like 80-mile-an-hour winds. And remember we said that that bay was shallow, and when that wind would hit it, that water would churn, it would go up and down, it would go over each other, the waves would. It was violent, and it wasn't safe for people to be out on it. Well, because the water wasn't very deep, the bottom of it was very muddy. The people that went out fishing on that bay out into the ocean, they were very careful what they did when they went sailing out there to catch fish. Well, this morning, Timmy and his companion had set out for a day of fishing, and they had gotten way out where they wanted to be, and they immediately started catching fish, trying to get as many as they could before they needed to go back. While they were on top of that boat fishing, they heard their little shortwave radio start sending out warnings that there was a storm coming. Well, Timmy and his friend didn't mess around. They immediately pulled in all their fishing nets, and as quick as they could, they turned their boat around and headed for shore. But way before they got there, that violent storm hit, and that bay turned into a big, slopping back and forth water with huge waves that were coming up and over anything that was in it. It was violent, and they never knew how long they were going to last. Well, they were heading for shore as fast as they could go when, oh no, they developed a leak in the side of their boat. Well, Timmy and his friend had some big cans inside of that boat specifically for this. They started scooping and throwing that water back out into the bay from the inside of their boat. And they did it for a long, long time. And it wasn't making any difference. Timmy, he turned to his friend and he said, "You keep bailing the water. I just thought of something. If this boat were to turn over, because the bay is so shallow, our mast, it would get stuck in the mud, and we would never be able to get out. I've got to get the mast down." So quickly, Tommy took a wrench, and he headed back to where that big, tall mast was, and he started cranking on those bolts. The harder he worked, it seemed, the harder the waves and stuff got. He didn't know what he was going to do. He couldn't get it loose. And then he looked at it. Oh, it was all corroded from the seawater. You know what corroded means? It was all covered with rust, and you couldn't turn it then. He said, but I gotta get it off. And he kept trying and trying. And finally, he remembered to pray. And he said, oh God, please help me to get the mast down. Please, please send me help. Well, just about that time, a huge wave came up, and it threw Timmy to the back of the boat. He got up and he scurried back. He grabbed that wrench again, and he tried and he tried. But then Timmy's friend hollered, you gotta come help me. There's too much water. It's gonna swamp the boat. So Timmy ran back to help his friend. And when he got back and he started to bail, he looked up because he saw a movement in the middle of the boat. He thought, what was that? And as he watched that huge mast, if Timmy had gotten it undone, he would just have to wait for the wind to blow it over and for it to fall over because he wouldn't be strong enough to pick it up. But as he watched, there wasn't anybody there. But he saw that big mast being lifted up off the base and ever so gently thrown over the side of the boat into that wave. Timmy, he couldn't believe it. It had to have been an angel. It had to have been. Neither one of them could have lifted that straight up and thrown it over the edge. And he knew it wasn't the wind. The wind couldn't lift it up. The wind could knock it down, but it wouldn't lift it up. And he said, oh, thank you, God. Thank you for the help. And he kept bailing and bailing and bailing. Well, then, as if the devil said, oh, that storm got worse than it had been since it started. It raged and it hit at that boat. It would push it up big waves and throw it down the other side. And finally, that boat got on top of a large wave. And it tipped straight over down into those waves. Well, Timmy and his friend saw that coming, and they jumped into that water for their lives. Now that water was too violent for anybody to swim in. They fought till they were over by the side of the boat, and they held on tightly. At least they could keep their heads above water, even though their whole body was in the cold, cold water. They held on. 1 hour, 2 hours. Finally, Timmy's friend said, I don't think I can hold on any longer. Timmy, he started to pray again. Oh, God, help us. Well, Timmy knew that those storms could last long, long periods of time. And because they took so long to settle down, it could be as long as 10 days till boats could go out to help them. He didn't know what he was going to do. His friend was fading fast. Timmy reached over and he put his arm around him, trying to hold him up. Well, with one hand, it was so hard for him to hold on, and especially with the weight of his friend. He thought, oh God, please help us. Then Timmy looked up, and as that water kept thrashing him about, they couldn't see very well, because those storms, it's like the gray clouds of the sky join to the edge of the horizon where the water is, and you can't tell what's water and what's sky. And then he looked up, and he couldn't believe it. Out of that mist, coming toward them, was a boat, a fishing boat, a rescue boat. Well, it shouldn't have been there, but Timmy was so glad to see it. He held on. He said to his friend, "God's answered us. Look!" And even though that storm was still raging, that fishing boat went straight toward Timmy and his friend. And even though it was being beat about by that storm, it stopped, and it pulled Timmy and his friend aboard and got them to the shore. When Timmy and his friend were safely on shore, of course they thought, "We've lost our boat. We've lost our fishing equipment. We've lost all the fish that was going to be our days or weeks' wages." But then they thought, "But we're alive, and we're so glad to be alive." And Timmy said, "And know that there still is a God that answers prayers up there." Oh, they were they couldn't believe God had actually answered their very own prayers in the midst of a storm. God is so good. Thank you, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.